Okay, everyone, Shabbat Shalom. Today we are going to embark on a new series, The Difficult Words of Paul, and there are many of them. So I think all of us we understand that Paul has been hugely misunderstood. He's been pulled out of context. He's been cherry-picked, and not just by the Christian side, but also by the Judeo side. Both twist the words of Paul. Just they do so in a different way. Well, actually, in very similar ways. The outcomes are different. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this series is because I've realized there's a lot of new people coming into the wider community. And I think most of us understand that, the front of the book still matters. We understand that the Father's ways are not a burden, that they're not a curse. And we understand these things and we try and apply these in our lives. And then someone new to this side of the journey comes across the letters of Paul and they don't know how to reconcile this new understanding that, yes, the front of the book matters. Well, Paul, what are you talking about? Because you're confusing me. You seem to be talking out of both sides of your mouths. And we have the warnings in Scripture, that Paul is difficult to understand and, there's a delusion attached to that. But really, I wanted to go through this to really help people understand, because especially when people are new to this side of the journey, they when we're dealing with, say, maybe our Christian brethren, you'll have this quip, well, you need to go read Galatians again, or you need to go read Romans. And it's like, some of us are able to go, well, I've read it, and actually Paul's not saying what you think he says. But a lot of people still struggle. Like, they understand, yes, the Torah is still applicable and it's very important, but Paul, man, you're speaking difficult things. So this is what this series is going to be about. And we're literally going to go verse by verse. Okay, so it's not like we're going to tackle just the difficult words. Like, so Galatians, we're going to go through the whole letter. And then after Galatians, we're going to hit Romans, because Galatians and Romans are the two main ones that people twist, and especially in the Christian circles. So these will be the ones that we cover, starting with Galatians, obviously, possibly the most misconstrued. So let's dive on in. We're going to cover Galatians 1 and 2, chapters 1 and 2 today. Now, before we even go to Galatians, I want to set a firm foundation, okay? Because, again, when I first started revisiting Paul in light of this understanding of the front of the book, the way I had to go about it was, well, if I understand what the front of the book says, what the foundation, what the Torah says, and if Paul's a true apostle, then I know what he is not saying, okay? And this was one of the ways, I was able to kind of navigate through beginning to understand Paul. However, let's set the firm foundation, okay? So Deuteronomy 13. When there arises among you a prophet or a dreamer of dreams, and he shall give you a sign or a wonder, and the sign and the wonder shall come true, of which he has spoken to you, saying, let us go after other mighty ones which you have not known, and serve them. Do not listen to the words of that prophet or that dreamer of dreams, for Yah your Elohim is trying you to know whether you love Yah your Elohim with all your heart and with all your being. So this is actually, are you fulfilling the Shema? Now, what does it mean to love Yah with all your heart, with all your being? He says it in the next verse, walk after Yah your Elohim and fear him and guard his commands and obey his voice and serve him and cling to him. So you see this thing of, if you serve, how do you serve a king? Well, you obey them, right? And every king will have laws and regulations. So this is how we demonstrate our love to Elohim. And the book of 1 John clearly spells this out. Now, again, I don't want to turn this into, testing of false prophets and stuff. But again, notice here, even if the sign or wonder comes true, okay, if it's taking you away from the commands, it's taking you away from serving Elohim, as stated here, you're being tested. Do you really love your Elohim? Because if you do, you won't mind. Like, his burden is light, right? We'll read this later. And that prophet or dreamer of dreams is put to death because he has spoken apostasy against Yah your Elohim. So apostasy in this chapter is linked to leading people away from the commands of Elohim. Now notice here it says, who brought you out of the land of Mitzrayim and ransomed you from the house of bondage. So think to yourself, Yah liberated Israel from the bondage of Egypt. Now in Christian circles, they will tell you that to follow the law is to be under bondage. Okay, so you're telling me that Yah took the Israelites out of bondage to put them back into bondage. It doesn't make sense, right? Unless you have some weird ideas about Elohim. So notice here, he ransomed the Israelites from the house of bondage. He set them free to make you stray from the way in which Yah your Elohim commanded you to walk. Thus you shall purge the evil from your midst. So again, the imagery here is he's given us commands to walk in. So it's not just to hear, it's to hear and do. And the false prophet will lead you away from walking in the commands. So again, if the reason I state this here, if Paul is an apostle of Elohim, he cannot make us walk away from the commandments. So when we start reading some of these difficult passages, we have to start thinking, okay, what is Paul not saying? And if we don't understand, is there something else that we're missing? Isaiah 8 verse 20, to the Torah and the witness, if they do not speak according to this word, it is because they have no daybreak or no dawn, no light. Okay? And the witness is the witness of the Torah, i.e. the prophets. Okay? So again, you have this unified message to the Torah, to the witness. If they're not speaking in line with that, it is not of Elohim. So again, how do we deal with Paul, okay? Malachi 4. Now, Malachi was one of the last prophets to speak before the arrival of Messiah. And you'll hear this thing of the intertestamental period where basically there was no prophecy. The Jews record this in their own history, that from Malachi onwards, that like the prophets and the hearing of the word of Yah seemed to just fall off a cliff. So this is Malachi, one of the last ones before Messiah. For look, the day shall come, burning like a furnace, all the proud, and every wrongdoer shall be stubble. And that day shall come, says Yah of hosts, which leaves them neither root nor branch. Now, this should have allusions to the end times, you know, the day of the Lord, you may have heard it. But you who fear my name, so who fear my authority, okay? Think of being submissive to a king here. You who fear my name, righteousness shall arise with healing in his wings, and you shall go out and leap for joy like calves from the stall. And you shall trample the wrongdoers, for they shall be ashes under the soles of your feet on the day that I do this, says Yah of hosts. This is how you know that this is inferring end times, right? Because the wrongdoers being ashes under our feet is got this end times allusion to it. Remember the Torah of Moshe, my servant, which I commanded him in Horeb for all Yisrael, laws and right rulings. I love this passage because, again, when you understand who you are, that you are part of the house of Israel, and that all the prophecies in regards to the scattering and the regathering were about the house of Israel, you have this reminder in the context of end times and the return of Messiah. And he's saying, remember the Torah of Moshe, which implies that at some point the house of Israel is going to forget it, which is why they need to remember it. And I believe here we are, okay? We're starting to witness Deuteronomy 30, where we're starting to remember the Torah of Moshe. But this is the warning from Scripture. Has it come to pass? I would say yes. In Amos 3, verse 7, for the Master Yah does no matter unless he reveals his secret to his servants, the prophets. So everything that Elohim will do will be declared throughout the prophets. The reason I bring this passage up is because nowhere in the prophets do I see anything about the commandments being done away with. In fact, I see the opposite. I see them being written on our hearts as part of the renewed covenant. There's no, and again, what did Malachi say? Remember the Torah of Moses. And here we're being told, Yah's not going to do anything without first revealing it. Please show me in the Tanakh, in the Old Testament, where you see that the Torah is going to be done away with. We see that it will be forgotten, and that it will seem like a strange thing to the northern kingdom. But like I said, in fact, we see the opposite. The fulfillment of the prophecies is that the commands are going to be written on our heart, not that they're going to be done away with. So again, like, what is Paul saying? How can we say that you're left with two choices? Either Paul is a false prophet or a false apostle, or we're misunderstanding him. Okay. 1 Corinthians 14, verse 32. The spirits of the prophets are subject to the prophets, which means that every prophet that has to align with the prophet that's gone before him, and all the prophets must align with the Torah. And again, what did Isaiah say? To the Torah and to the witness. If they do not speak according to this word, they've got no daybreak in them. You can imply they're in spiritual darkness. There's a delusion going on. And in Malachi, remember the Torah of Moshe. Remember it, implying that it will be forgotten. And again, we see this play out in the prophets. So when you have a modern day prophet saying that Torah, that law is not important, you kind of left scratching your head going, this doesn't fit on the foundation of the apostles and the prophets. Let's look at what our Messiah had to say. Matthew 5. Oh, wrong way. Matthew 5, verse 17. Do not think that I came to destroy the Torah or the prophets. I came not to destroy, but to complete or to fulfill. Okay? And this is where it will be commonly taught in Christianity, well, the law's being fulfilled, therefore I don't have to do it. And actually, you know, it doesn't... I like to use this analogy. Let's say I'm going to follow a recipe to bake bread. Okay, I fulfill the recipe of baking bread. The recipe just doesn't vanish away. It's now no longer, unusable. In fact, I can keep using it over and over. And I believe this is what we're seeing with the Torah. The Torah is there to be completed. It's there to be fulfilled. And Yeshua is clearly saying, I did not come to destroy it. If we're going to put the common Christian understanding into this verse, they're literally reading this. I do not come to destroy the Torah or the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to destroy, to do away with. This is how they're reading it. And the word here, to complete, plural, means to fill up to its measure, almost to demonstrate how it's done to its fullest measure. Okay? And again, you've got to realize that Hebrew thinking is precept upon precept. It builds, never undoing what's gone before it. Again, you have the foundation of the Torah, the prophets build off that, and then our Messiah comes, and he points all the way back to it. In our modern Greco-Roman thinking, we think, right, there's something new, do away with the old. This is not how the Hebrews thought. For truly I say to you, till the heaven and earth pass away, not one yod or tittle shall by no means pass from the Torah, until all be done. Now, again, you'll hear this common argument. It says, until all is done. And people will point to Messiah being on the cross saying, it is finished. Okay? And they say, see, everything is done. But notice that Yeshua connects this to heaven and earth passing away. And the last time I looked out my window earlier on today, heaven and earth is still very much there, okay? Which means that not one jot or tittle has by no means passed from the Torah. And again, what is this thing of till all be done? We'll get to that. Whoever then breaks one of the least of these commands and teaches men so shall be called least in the reign of the heavens. But whoever does and teaches them, he shall be called great in the reign of the heavens. That's our Messiah saying this. Okay, let's look at this idea of when everything will be completed, because Yeshua says, until heaven and earth pass away, until all is completed, the law shall stand. Revelation 20, I saw a great white throne and him who was sitting on it, from whose face the earth and the heaven fled away, and no place was found for them. So here you see the heavens and the earth almost passing away. Now this is at the end of the millennial reign, at the end of the 1,000 years. And I saw that, just to make the point clear, I saw the dead, small and great, standing before the throne, and the books were opened. And another book was opened, which is the book of life, and the dead were judged from what was written in the books according to their works. And the sea gave up the dead who were in it, and death and Sheol gave up the dead who were in them, and they were judged, each one according to his works. Have we seen this yet? No. Which means that the Torah still stands. And death and Sheol were thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death. Again, this is, if you read the context of the chapter, this is after the 1,000-year reign of Messiah. And then you keep reading into Revelation 21, and I saw a renewed heaven and a renewed earth, for the former heaven and the former earth had passed away, and the sea is no more. This is when Yeshua said that until heaven and earth pass away, that not one yod or tittle shall by no means be taken away. And I, Yochanan, saw the set-apart city, renewed Jerusalem, coming down out of the heaven from Elohim, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a voice from the heavens saying, see, the booth of Elohim is with men, and he shall dwell with them. And they shall be his people, and Elohim himself shall be with them, and be their Elohim. Again, I'm not seeing this just yet. And our Messiah very clearly said, until that happens, the Torah still stands. And Elohim shall wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, nor mourning, nor crying, and there shall be no more pain, for the former matters have passed away. And he who was sitting on the throne said, see, I make all matters new. And he said to me, write, for these words are true and trustworthy. And he said to me, it is done. This is when, so again, link this back to Matthew 5. Until heaven and earth pass away, not one yod of tittle shall by no means pass from the Torah until everything is complete, everything is done. And again, Christianity will point to when Messiah was on the cross, saying, he says, Father, it is done. When Yeshua is saying it is done on the cross, that was in terms of his earthly ministry. This is when you have heaven and earth passing away and everything is completed. Okay? So until that moment, the Torah still stands. Okay? It is done. I am the Aleph and the Tav, the beginning and the end. To the one who thirsts I shall give of the fountain of the water of life. And notice in verse 5, he says, these words are trustworthy. You can put your faith in them. Okay? Okay. Acts 21. And when we had arrived in Jerusalem, the brothers received us gladly. And on the following day, Shaul, or Paul, went with us to Yaakov, and all the elders came. And having greeted them, he was relating one by one what Elohim had done among the nations through his service. And when they heard it, they praised the Master. And they said to him, you see, brother, how many thousands of Yehudim there are who have believed, and all are ardent or zealous for the Torah. But they have been informed about you that you teach all the Yehudim who are among the nations to forsake Moshe, to forsake the commandments, saying not to circumcise the children nor walk according to their practices. Now, again, with the foundation we've just laid, you can realize how serious an accusation this is. Because what these people are accusing Paul of is being a false prophet. Right? Because, again, anyone that leads you away from Moses is false. And Elohim allows this to come into the body to test us, to see whether we love him or not. What then is it? They shall certainly hear that you have come. So do this, what we say to you. We have 4 men who have taken a vow. This is a Nazirite vow. Take them and be cleansed with them, and pay their expenses so that they shave their heads. And all shall know that what they have been informed about you is not so, but that you yourself also walk orderly, keeping the Torah. This is James, the head of the council in Jerusalem of the early believers, the brother of Messiah. And he's telling us right here that the accusation against Paul the accusation to forsake Moses is a false one. So again, this is something that I remember coming into this side of the journey going, when was that put in there? Right? Because here's the thing, from the Christian mindset, either you have Paul being disingenuous, he's keeping the Torah but then saying actually don't bother, or you have to discredit the account of Acts, or you have to discredit James. Again, like the accusation against Paul that he was lawless is a false one. If not, just rip out this page out of your book. So now we know that the accusation is a false one. We still have to deal with his confusing words, eh? And finally, 2 Peter 3. So then, beloved ones, looking forward to this, do your utmost to be found by him in peace, spotless and blameless, and reckon the patience of our Master as deliverance, as also our beloved brother Shaul wrote to you, according to the wisdom given to him, as also in all his letters, speaking in them concerning these matters, in which some are hard to understand. We're being warned, Paul is hard to understand, which those who are untaught and unstable twist to their own destruction, as they also do the other scriptures. So they twist these things. You then, beloved ones, being forewarned, watch, lest you fall from your own steadfastness, being led away with the delusion of the lawless. Okay? In the King James, it will say iniquity, the delusion of iniquity. But when you look at the Greek word there, it means to be without law. And they're not speaking of the law of Rome, that's for sure. So we're being told here, Peter's outright saying, do not twist Paul's words to lawlessness, because that is a delusion. It's a delusion. And notice here that to be led away by this delusion of lawlessness is to fall from our steadfastness, our faith. So what kind of faith were these people living? Clearly one that involved the Torah. But grow in the favor and knowledge of our Master and Savior Yeshua Messiah. Here, favor, in the King James English, it will be grace. Grow in the grace and knowledge of our Master and Savior Yeshua Messiah. And he's saying this off the heels of, do not be led away by the delusion of the lawless. And don't twist Paul's words to get there either, because they're difficult to understand. And then he says, grow in the grace. The point I'm trying to make, and we're going to see this as well, because Paul will say in other places, and we'll get this further in the series, by favor or by grace, you have been saved. Okay? And Peter's saying to grow in this favor right off the heels of, do not be led away with the delusion of the lawless. Okay? So there's clearly a law-keeping component to the biblical faith here, even in the first century. The warning in Daniel 7, this is speaking of the little horn, okay? So it's speaking end times. It speaks words against the Most High, and it wears out the set-apart ones of the Most High, and it intends to change appointed times and law. And they are given into its hand for a time and times and half a time. We're being told that the adversarial position, the very thing it will go after, is the appointed times and the Torah. Again, like, is Daniel lying? This is like Daniel got these revelations from Elohim and had Gabriel show up, right, to help him understand these things. And we're being told that in the end times, that's the thing the enemy will go after. Why? Because they're the signs of covenant. Like, look, right now we're meeting on the Shabbat, which is a sign of covenant. Like, it's Elohim's seal upon his people. Same with the Moedim. And the Torah is simply the conditions of that covenant. And this is the thing the adversarial position will go after. So again, we're being warned of a delusion of lawlessness, and that this is what the enemy will go after. I mean, you know, how do you read around this? This is when you know it's a spiritual blindness going on, by the way. Like, you can show people these verses and you watch it bounce off their head because the leaven is screaming in their mind. I also want to put this: the system that attacked Messiah and his apostles was judged. History is clear. What I mean by this, because you have, remember what I said, both sides of the river twist Paul's words. Christianity will use Paul for the delusion of lawlessness, and they'll say Paul is saying this and that, and none of this really matters. But on the other side, you have people are doing the same thing, but then throwing Paul out, and then that begins this journey, you know, which can be quite dangerous actually. And the reason I say this is because people that are throwing Paul out, they're no different than what the Pharisees and the religious system of the first century were doing. Okay, they did not accept Paul. They did not accept Messiah. They did not accept the apostles. In fact, they persecuted them. Go look at what happened to them. History is clear. Jerusalem was destroyed in AD 70. I mean, destroyed. Go read Josephus. Josephus says that the bodies in the temple courts were stacked so high that they would roll down, and you had to climb. That's how great the judgment was. And those are the people that attacked Messiah and his apostles. They got judged harsh, very harsh. So when, you know, again, when people don't understand Paul's words and start to throw him out, be very careful, because the last system that did that, they got judged and sent into exile. Okay, and history is very clear on that. We've got the history books to testify. Okay. That was just foundation for the whole series, okay? So we have to ask ourselves, if Paul is of Messiah, if Paul is of the biblical faith, he cannot do away with the Torah or the appointed times. We've clearly seen that the law shall stand until heaven and earth pass away, and that's not happening until the 1,000 years. And here's the thing. Like, the Torah is meant to be written on our hearts. His covenant will be written on our hearts. What do you think's coming out into eternity, right? Flesh and blood does not inherit it, but maybe something written on our hearts. So anyway, now that we've got this foundation, let's actually read Paul, right? Because we have to start, again, think of, if Paul troubles you, think, what can he not be saying, okay? Okay, Shaul, an emissary, an apostle, not from men nor by man, but by Yeshua Messiah and Elohim the Father, who raised him from the dead. And all the brothers who are with me, to the assemblies of Galatia, favor to you and peace from Elohim the Father and our Master Yeshua Messiah. So favor, grace, you see this coming up a lot, okay? And we'll delve into this throughout the series. Who gave himself for our sins, to deliver us out of this present wicked age, according to the desire of our Elohim and Father. So here we see we've been delivered, we've been made free by Messiah, okay? You're going to see these themes come up: favor, freedom, sin, okay? To whom be the praise forever and ever. Amen. I marvel that you are so readily turning away from him who called you in the favor of Messiah to a different good news, or a different gospel, which is not another, only there are some who are troubling you and wishing to pervert the good news of Messiah. Notice what Paul is saying here, that they're not outright preaching a different gospel. They're perverting the original one, which makes it a different one. Okay, so he's saying there's it's deceptive, it's seductive. You won't clearly see it, if that makes sense. Just a small little thing, you know, a little leaven leavens the whole lump. So here we're being told that they're turning away from the good news. And we're going to see what Paul means as we go through this. However, even if we or a messenger out of heaven bring a good news to you beside what we announce to you, let him be accursed. I actually believe Paul's referencing in a roundabout way Deuteronomy 13. If a false prophet, even if their sign comes true, if they're trying to lead you away from the commands, they're a false prophet and you're being tested. Okay, and notice Paul's kind of using this similar thing, like you're turning away from a good news, from a gospel, and even if a messenger, an angel were to show up, and it's a different good news, let them be accursed. As we have said before, and I now say again, if anyone brings a good news to you beside what you have received, let him be accursed. For now do I persuade men, or Elohim, or do I seek to please men? For if I still pleased men, I should not be a servant of Messiah. So he's saying that what he's doing, everything he's done is in service to the king. Okay? He's serving Messiah. And I make known to you, brothers, that the good news announced by me is not according to man. So now he's going to start to kind of not give his credentials, but he's going to make the point that he didn't make this up. This came from Elohim. For I did not receive it from man, nor was I taught it, but through a revelation of Yeshua Messiah, right? His Damascus Road experience. For you have heard of my former behavior in Judaism, how I intensely persecuted the assembly of Elohim and ravaged it. And I progressed in Judaism beyond many of my age in my race, being more exceedingly ardent for the traditions of my fathers. Okay, so Paul's making a very clear statement here. He was zealous for tradition. Okay, yes, they were raised on the Torah, but again, we know that they'd added a whole load of extracurricular stuff. So, and here he's pointing out the traditions of my fathers. And this is going to be one of the things you have to understand about Paul. There's a and this is where Christianity maybe gets caught up. They don't understand the difference between the Torah, the law of Elohim, and the oral law, or the Talmudic laws, right? The Mishnah clause, and there's a difference. Okay, one is from heaven, the other, the traditions of men, is the interpretation, it's man's interpretation of how to walk out the Torah. But with that comes all this added baggage. But when it pleased Elohim, who separated me from my mother's womb and called me by his favor, to reveal his son in me, that I might bring him, i.e. Yeshua, the good news. Notice what the good news is. It's Messiah. Okay, and it's not just that Messiah died and was resurrected. What does the death and resurrection of Messiah allow? Okay, this is what the good news is, that people can come back into covenant, that the northern kingdom, like everyone can come back home, so to speak. But notice he says, when he did not immediately consult with flesh and blood, i.e. with man, neither did I go up to Jerusalem, but to those who were emissaries before me. So here he's saying, like, he didn't, when he received this revelation, he went to those that were anointed and appointed by Messiah. But I went to Arabia and returned to Damascus. Then after 3 years, I went to Jerusalem to learn from Kepha and remained with him for 15 days. So he went to Peter. So Paul disappears to Arabia for 3 years. Now, we read later on in Galatians that Mount Sinai is in Arabia. I believe that Paul went to the vicinity of Mount Sinai for 3 years to revisit everything he had learned, because he had to re-go through his schooling. And then he goes to Peter, remains with him for 15 days. And I saw no other of the emissaries except Yaakov, the brother of the master, so James. And what I write to you, see before Elohim, I do not lie. Okay? Now remember, for a Jewish person to say, before, he's using Yah's name. He's using the authority of Elohim. This is not something he would have said flippantly. So he's really trying to put the weight behind what he's saying. I do not lie, and I do not lie before Elohim. Then I went into the districts of Syria and Cilicia, And I was not known by sight to the assemblies of Yehudah, which were in Messiah. But they were hearing only that the one who persecuted us now brings as good news as gospel the belief which he once ravaged. So they were esteeming Elohim in me. So the reason I've gone through this is because this is the context of the rest of the letter. Galatians 2, this is where we're going to start drilling down now. And we're going to tackle pretty much a chapter a week. Then after 14 years, I went up to Jerusalem with Barnabas, taking Titus along too. And I went up by revelation and laid before them that good news which I proclaim among the nations, but separately to those who were esteemed, lest somehow I run or had run in vain. This is amazing. A lot of people miss this, but Paul was making himself accountable to those who were esteemed, okay? And we find out later on that this was Peter, James, and John, i.e. the apostles of the Messiah. You have Paul taking the message he's preaching and he's running it past those who were esteemed to make sure that he's basically not wasting his time. Funny that, eh? We don't see Paul holding himself to account there. But not even Titus, who was with me, though a Greek, was compelled to be circumcised. See, you don't need to be circumcised. And people will use this passage to do that. Because Titus wasn't compelled. Let's actually look at the word compelled. Anagkadzo, to necessitate, to compel. Now notice here, by force, by threats. You will be circumcised or else. Or by any other means. How about shaming people? You know, you shame people into doing something. This is what the Torah Nazi police does. They shame people into, you know, keeping the commandments, and it becomes a box-ticking exercise. Notice it's saying, like, verse 3 is not saying that Titus didn't need to be circumcised. All it's saying is that he was not compelled by force or threats. He's just saying we didn't force him to do it. Does that change the meaning of the verse? Let's not insert something into this verse that it is not saying. Paul is not saying that Titus didn't need to be circumcised. All it's saying, he wasn't forced to be circumcised. That changes it. It's got a very different tone to the verse now. And we'll get back to this circumcision thing. This is going to be, we'll tackle a bit of it today, and it comes up again next week in the next parts. So Titus was not forced to be circumcised. But as for the false brothers, sneakingly brought in, who sneaked in to spy out our freedom, which we have in Messiah Yeshua, in order to enslave us, to these we did not yield in subjection, not even for an hour, so that the truth of the good news remains with you. And this is where Christianity will say that we are free from the law. Like, the law enslaved us, and now we have freedom in Jesus, and we don't need to keep that burdensome law, and on and on and on. And is that what Paul is saying? First of all, we need to know what the freedom found in Messiah is, because we learn that this is freedom from the law. Yet Paul was keeping it. Yet James said that the accusation against Paul being lawless were false. Do you see? Like, it doesn't jive. It doesn't jive. So what is the freedom found in Messiah? In Deuteronomy 5, we read this earlier. I am Yah your Elohim, who brought you out of the land of Mitzrayim, out of the house of bondage. You have no other mighty ones against my face. Again, our Elohim is an Elohim of freedom. So why would he take them out of Egypt, out of bondage, to put them back into bondage? That's capricious. And this is, unfortunately, the way we paint our Elohim in our minds. And let's go one step further. I believe that was Yeshua. Paul and the apostles believed that was Yeshua, leading them out of Egypt. Right? The messenger who gave the living words. Right? They saw his feet and all this. So Messiah took them out of Egypt, out of bondage, to put them into bondage. It doesn't make sense. Our Elohim is an Elohim of freedom. Now, freedom always has rules attached to it, because if not, it's anarchy. There's a big difference between freedom and anarchy. Did Elohim bring us out of bondage to put us back into bondage? Because that's not an Elohim I want to serve. Psalm 119, verses 43. Do not take away from my mouth the word of truth entirely. Now again, what King David is writing this. What's the word of truth? He's only got the Torah and the book of Judges. For I have waited for your right rulings, that I might guard your Torah continually forever and ever, like forever, that I might walk in a broad place, for I have sought your orders. Here, David is, this walking in a broad place means there's room. It means you're free to move. You're not being constricted. In some translations, it will say that I may walk freely, that I may walk in freedom. Okay? So here, David is saying that once he has the Torah, he can walk in a broad place, that he has freedom to move. And he wants to do this forever. Mark chapter 7, verse 3, for the Pharisees and all the Yehudim do not eat unless they wash their hands thoroughly, holding fast the tradition of the elders. And coming from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they wash. And there are many other traditions which they have received and hold fast, the washing of cups and utensils and copper and vessels and couches. Okay, so they'd heaped upon themselves all this bondage, right? I think in modern Judaism, there's over 1,000 rules in regards to Shabbat. The day of rest, there's 1,000 rules to it, according to the traditions of modern Judaism. That's not freedom. And he answering said to them, well did Yeshayahu, Isaiah the prophet, prophesy concerning you hypocrites. As it has been written, this people respect me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. And in vain do they worship me, teaching as teachings the commands of men. So this is what they were dealing with in the first century. They were forsaking the Torah for the traditions. Forsaking the command of Elohim, you hold fast the tradition of men. And he said to them, well do you set aside the command of Elohim in order to guard your tradition. Like, this is our Messiah reproving the authorities, the religious authorities. And unfortunately, Christianity will read this as Yeshua is attacking them for keeping the law. But this speaks very clearly, like, you set aside the command of Elohim in order to guard your tradition. And we have to understand that this is what's being warned against. Then Yeshua spoke to the crowds, Matthew 23 verse 1, and to his taught ones, saying, the scribes and the Pharisees sit on the seat of Moses. This is an idiomatic expression for, in the synagogues, there was a seat that they sat on when they were reading from the Torah. And you were only allowed to, when you stood up, then you could give your interpretation, but while you were sat on the seat, you had to read Moses and only Moses. Therefore, whatever they say to you, guard and do, but do not do according to their works, for they say and they do not do. So again, they're sitting on the seat of Moses, they're saying, this is Moses, but yet they do not do it. Link this to Mark chapter 7. Well, do you lay aside the command of Elohim to hold fast to your traditions? Now, I want to point out here, there's a manuscript called, it's a Hebrew version of Matthew called the Shem Tov. And the Shem Tov it's not as ancient as people think, but what's really interesting, it says here, therefore, whatever he says to you, and the inference is that the he is actually Moses. So it says, the scribes and the Pharisees sit on the seat of Moses. Therefore, whatever he says, guard and do. But do not do according to the works of the Pharisees, for they say and do not do. So either way you want to interpret it, Moses is being upheld by the Messiah. For they bind heavy burdens hard to bear and lay them on men's shoulders, but with their fingers they do not wish to move them. What are the heavy burdens? Right? all these traditions that they'd added upon themselves. So that's the heavy burden. This is our Messiah saying this, by the way. So again, when you start hearing this thing of the law being a burden, I will say this, and we'll get to Acts chapter 15, and yeah. Matthew 11, verse 28, come to me, all you who labor and are burdened, and I shall give you rest. Who's he speaking to? He's speaking to Jews at the time, those in Judea. And what had happened to them? They'd been burdened with all these extra traditions that are nowhere found in the Torah. Nowhere. And he's saying, come to me, find rest. You know, you don't have to worry about these 1,000+ rules on the Sabbath. Just honor the Sabbath. Anyway, I hope people hear where I'm coming from. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am meek and humble in heart, and you shall find rest for your beings. For my yoke is gentle and my burden is light. Now let me ask you this. What word did Yeshua preach? He spoke the Father's words. You know, I've done this we've made these connections before, that he only spoke what the Father spoke. Now, what did the Father speak? Again, Yeshua says, I do not do away with the Torah and the prophets. In fact, I uphold them. I show you how to live in it. And he's saying that his burden is light. It's freedom. James 1:25, or Yaakov, this is Messiah's brother writing this, but he that looked into the perfect Torah, that of freedom, and continues in it, not becoming a hearer that forgets, but a doer of work, this one shall be blessed in his doing of the Torah. I don't know how to get around that, right? And this is what I sometimes find frustrating, because you know, on the Christian side, they're saying, oh, it's a terrible and burdensome thing. And like, the writers of the New Testament did not think that. Why are we so far removed from what they were living? Is it maybe, again, are we witnessing the attack on the covenant, on the law and the appointed times that we were told would happen? So the writers of the New Testament are saying that, and again, what did David say? That the Torah allows us to walk in a broad place. Remember, there's a difference between freedom and anarchy. Deuteronomy 4:2, do not add to the word which I command you, and do not take away from it, so as to guard the commands of Yah your Elohim, which I am commanding you. And on the Judah side, they like to add to the word. On the Christian side, we like to take away from it. Okay, and both are falling in the same ditch. Again, it's repeated. All the words I'm commanding you, guard to do it. Do not add to it or take away from it. And this is what Yeshua was scolding the religious system of the day. Not that they were keeping the Torah, but they'd added all this baggage on top of it. And that was the burden. Proverbs 30, verse 5 and 6. Every word of Eloah is tried. He is a shield to those taking refuge in him. Do not add to his words, lest he reprove you, and you be found a liar. A liar. Yeah. When we do away with the Torah, we're saying that every word of Elohim is not pure. The word here for tried is refined through the fire. It's come out gleaming, pure. Think of gold and silver going through the fire. Our freedom in Messiah is not a freedom to do as we please. In the Christian world, we've made it anarchy, religious anarchy. I can do what I want. We read of that elsewhere in Scripture. In Judges 21:25, in those days there was no sovereign in Israel. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Go read the greater context of that. This is not a good thing. This is not a good thing. In fact, it was a terrible thing. When we do what is right in our own eyes, because we believe that the law's done away with or something, we claim to have no king over us. This is what Scripture is saying. If you're doing what is right in your own eyes, well, your king is you. You are your own king. You're sat on the throne. Every king and kingdom has rules. One pledges allegiance to a king and kingdom by obeying its rules. So again, this house of Israel, Elohim has set up a kingdom and it has rules. If you want to be part of the kingdom, just abide by the rules. By the way, those rules are for your freedom. It means you can walk down the street and not be murdered. You don't have to worry about your neighbors sleeping with your wife. Or if you lose your ox, it will be returned to you. That's freedom. That's peace. If we do not follow the rules of the King of Israel, we claim that he is not our king. It really is that simple. Who do you pledge allegiance to? If Messiah is not our king, we're in servitude and bondage to another king, i.e. another gospel. Now, remember how Paul opened out the letter to the Galatians. I fear for you that you are so readily turning away from the good news we gave you to another gospel, to another good news. And we're told elsewhere that we're to obey the gospel, whatever that means, right? So I hope people are seeing, because remember, Israel was liberated from Egypt. They were taken out of bondage and put in a land, in the promised land, and they were given freedom. And now, our forefathers screwed everything up, basically. They fell into spiritual adultery, and we're now reeling from the curses of it. And we're in this similar place now. We need to be freed, okay? We need to be freed. If we're claiming Messiah's not our king by not obeying his word, we're listening to a different gospel. Our freedom is from the penalty of sin. That's one of the things we're freed from, as well as the traditions of men. Right? Remember, in the first century, they had a whole heap of tradition on top of the Torah to keep. And Yeshua is saying, get rid of that stuff. My yoke is light. It's freedom. Romans 6:23. The wages of sin is death, but the favorable or gracious gift of Elohim is everlasting life in Messiah Yeshua, our Master. So whenever you see this language of grace to you or favor to you, they're referencing this. The favorable or gracious gift of Elohim. So the wages of sin is death. And we know that our Messiah paid the price of our sin. And our sin is the breaking of the law, the breaking of the Torah. Everyone doing sin also does lawlessness. And sin is lawlessness. And you know that he was manifested to take away our sins, our lawlessness. And in him, there is no sin, no lawlessness. Everyone staying in him does not sin, does not do lawlessness. Everyone doing lawlessness has neither seen him nor known him. I love to say this. This is John, the quote-unquote apostle of love, right? He's pretty harsh, actually, when you read his letters. He's saying if you claim to be of Messiah and you walk in knowing lawlessness, you're blinded, he's saying. You don't even know who your king is. So if you don't know who your king is, how can you be listening to the true gospel? If you don't know who king is, the one who came to give the good news, right? It doesn't make sense. So that's the freedom of Messiah, okay? I hope that kind of makes sense. Let's continue through this. So remember the context of Galatians 2, that Paul had gone to Jerusalem to make himself accountable to Peter, James, and John, and that these men who'd come in, they didn't listen to them, not even for an hour. But from those who were esteemed to be something, he's referencing Peter, James, and John, right? Those who were esteemed, the leaders of the community. What they were, it makes no difference to me. Elohim shows no partiality. So he's not having a dig at them there. He's just saying, look, it doesn't matter that actually they're the elders, because we're all men, right? Elohim's not a respecter of people. For those who were esteemed contributed nothing to me. Now, this is in the context. Remember what Paul said. He's not saying that these guys, he's not deriding them. Remember what he said. He took the message he was preaching and he made himself accountable to Peter, James, and John. And here he's saying, well, they contributed nothing. This means that when he held himself accountable to see if he'd run in vain, they were okay. That means when they they diacrinoed, they iron sharpened iron, Paul was found to be speaking truth. This is all Paul is saying. He's not being derogatory. He's just saying, I held myself accountable. They couldn't add nothing more because I'm preaching truth. But on the contrary, when they saw that the good news to the uncircumcised had been entrusted to me, even as Kepha to the circumcised, for he who worked in Kepha to make him an emissary to the circumcised also worked in me for the nations. So again, this is how they knew Paul was speaking truth. Kepha and Yochanan, again, who seemed to be pillars. So when you see those who are esteemed, this is who Paul is speaking of. And notice these were the people he made himself accountable to. When they came to know the favor that had been given to me, they gave me and Barnabas the right hand of fellowship, not the left foot of fellowship that a lot of us have experienced, the right hand, in order that we go to the nations and they to the circumcised, only that we might remember the poor, which I myself was eager to do. Now, you're probably thinking, well, where is this in Scripture? Paul is actually referencing Acts chapter 15. And what Paul is doing, he's actually giving us a little extra couple of details, like the fact that he made himself accountable. You won't see that in Acts chapter 15, but you see the rest of it. So let's look at Acts chapter 15, because the whole context of... remember what the context of Galatians in. These people that have come in that are preaching a different good news, okay? And then he goes on to reference Acts chapter 15, or the events of Acts chapter 15. Certain men came down from Yehudah and were teaching the brothers, unless you are circumcised according to the practice of Moshe, you are unable to be saved. And this is the problem here. Circumcision is not the issue here. It's salvation through circumcision. Unless you lose the foreskin of your penis, you cannot be saved. I'm going to put it that way because when you put it that way, it seems ridiculous. And this is what they were saying. Unless you are circumcised, you are unable to be saved, i.e., eternal life. Okay? This is the issue that we're dealing with. So when Shaul and Barnabas had no small dissension and dispute with them, they arranged for Shaul and Barnabas and certain others of them to go up to Jerusalem to the emissaries and elders about this question. So this is where they go to the esteemed ones, right? So being sent on their way by the assembly, they passed through Phoenicia and Shamaron, relating the conversion of the nations, and they were causing great joy to all the brothers. And having arrived in Jerusalem, they were received by the assembly and the emissaries and the elders, and they reported all that Elohim had done with them. And some of the believers who belonged to the sect of the Pharisees. Now, these are believing Pharisees, right? You are unable to be saved unless you are circumcised. So they'd clearly not let go of some Pharisaic baggage. They rose up saying, it is necessary to circumcise them and to command them to keep the Torah of Moshe. Okay? And this is where Christianity would say, see, this was a bad thing. But they miss out verse 1. For salvation. Okay? And this is, we're going to see that this is the main point that Paul makes throughout his letters. The emissaries and elders came together to look into this matter. And when they heard there had been much dispute, Kepha rose up and said to the men, brothers, you know that a good while ago Elohim chose among us that by my mouth the nations should hear the word of the good news and believe. And Elohim, who knows the heart, bore witness to them by giving them the set-apart spirit as also to us, and made no distinction between us and them, cleansing their hearts by belief, by faith. He's saying, though we are Jews and they were not, he was bringing them into the house. And remember that the spirit is the mark or the seal that we are his. Now then, why do you try Elohim by putting a yoke on the neck of the taught ones, which neither our fathers nor we were able to bear? See, the Torah is a heavy burden. Again, go back to Acts chapter 15, verse 1. That it's for salvation. That it's for salvation. Look, what are the wages of sin, of breaking the Torah? Death. Death. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of Elohim. So if you're going to try gain your salvation through Torah obedience, good luck. That's the burden, not the Torah itself. The fact that, we're condemned to die. Again, unless you are circumcised according to the practice of Moshe, you are unable to be saved, to be delivered. Good luck having your salvation through anything else other than faith in Messiah. That's the burden part of it, of us trying to, by our own righteousness, gain salvation. It's impossible. This is the point that Peter is making. But through the favor, the grace of the Master Yeshua Messiah, we trust to be saved in the same way as they. By the way, go watch my Honor and Shame series. I forget which one, but the one where I deal with grace or favor. When you gave grace to someone, you were expected to give a response back, by the way. But whole other topic. And all the crowd was silent and were listening to Barnabas and Shaul declaring how many miracles and wonders Elohim did among the nations through them. So this is the whole point. They can come into faith by the Spirit before they get physically circumcised. And after they were silent, Yaakov, James, answered, saying, Men, brothers, listen to me. And remember, this is the brother of Yeshua, okay? Shimon has declared how Elohim first visited the nations to take them out of them, a people for his name. Now, I don't want to get into the scattered house reality, but a lot of the people that Peter were going to were lost tribes. Well, they weren't lost in that day, but these were people from the northern kingdom. And these words of the prophets agree with this, as it has been written. After this, I shall return and rebuild the booth of David, which was fallen down, and I shall rebuild its ruins and shall set it up, so that the remnant of mankind shall seek Yah. Even all the nations on whom my name has been called, says Yah, who is doing all this, who has made this known from of old. Therefore, I judge, he's passing sentence, he's making a decree, that we should not trouble those from among the nations who are turning to Elohim, but that we write to them to abstain from the defilement of idols and from whoring or sexual immorality, from what is strangled and from blood. See, Michael, this is all we have to do. This is all we have to do. First of all, this prevented you from going to a pagan temple. And this is the text I use to say, if you're going to go do this journey and stop dipping your toes on either riverbank, whether the Judeo side or whether the Christian side. But whole other topic. Now listen to this. For from ancient generations, Moses, the Torah, in every city, those proclaiming him, being read in the congregations every Sabbath. So here there's an understanding that the nations coming in, first of all, they were to go to Shabbat, and they were to hear Moses being proclaimed and hearing the word. Again, what are they... Anyway, essentially what they're saying is don't trouble them and put the Torah on them all in one go. And this is what we do. We lose a lot of peace over this. We come into this journey and we want to be Torah observant yesterday. This is not the pattern that we're being given. You learn week by week. Those of you that have been doing this longer, stop looking down on those who haven't been doing it as long. They'll work it out in their own time. Do not be like those of the circumcision party, expecting them to have the whole weight of the law on them in one go. Bit by bit by bit. That's all they're saying. So there's an understanding. Look, they'll learn the Torah bit by bit. Just, for now, as long as they're not going to pagan temples, they'll get the rest week by week. Then it seemed good to the emissaries and the elders with all the assembly to send chosen men from among them to Antioch with Shaul and Barnabas. Yehudah being called Barsabah, and Silas leading men among the brothers. Again, also remember, this is what Paul is referencing in Galatians. So the decision they came to, the esteemed pillars of the assembly, right? They said they will learn the Torah week by week. They've already been saved because clearly the Ruach has come upon them, but now they'll need to learn Moses. And this is what Paul is referencing when he's talking about this false gospel and things going on. The false gospel was not the Torah. It was thinking that you could work out your own salvation by your works. Having been written by their hand this, the emissaries and the elders unto the brothers who are of the nations in Antioch. Now, Antioch is a major city in Galatia, okay? Remember this. And Syria and Cilicia, greetings. Since we have heard that some who went out from us, this is how we know that we're believers in Messiah, have troubled you with words, unsettling your lives, to whom we gave no command. And what was the troublesome words? Unless you are circumcised, you are not saved. Never mind that the spirit of Elohim has come upon you. No. You need to go through the conversion process according to what we've made it to be, according to our Pharisaic traditions. This is what's going on here. It seemed good to us, having become of one mind, to send chosen men with you, our beloved Barnabas and Shaul, men who have given up their lives for the name of our Master Yeshua Messiah. We have therefore sent Yehudah and Silas, who are also confirming this by word of mouth. For it seemed good to the set-apart spirit. So again, this is from Elohim and to us, to lay upon you no greater burden than these necessities, that you abstain from what is offered to idols and blood and what is strangled and whoring. If you keep yourselves from these, you shall do well. Be strong. Again, you have to read this in the context of what we read earlier. Why? Because on the Sabbath they will hear Moses. Moses teaches us how to be set apart. It helps us deal with matters of sanctification, if that makes sense. They, therefore, being sent off, went to Antioch, which again is in Galatia. So clearly the Galatians, first they had this going on. You know, they were losing their peace because those of the circumcision party were saying, well, doesn't matter that you've had the Spirit. You need to be converted. That's what was going on. And then Acts chapter 15 occurs. And so they send this letter out. And then we get to Galatians. Clearly, after the events of Acts chapter 15, the Galatians were falling back into this mindset. They needed to be circumcised to be saved, okay? By the way, this is why Paul earlier on says that even Titus was not compelled or forced to be circumcised. This is what the circumcision party was doing. They were forcing it upon people when it should have been coming from a sovereign choice from the heart. So, I hope people are keeping up. I know that there's a lot in there, but again, Paul is difficult to understand, and we have to kind of go here, go there to kind of get the full picture. So, okay, Galatians 2:11, and when Kepha had come to Antioch, again to Galatia, I withstood him to his face because he was at fault. For before some came from Yaakov, he was eating with the nations, you know, those that are not Jewish, basically. But when they came, those from Jacob, from Yaakov, he began to withdraw and separate himself in fear of those of the circumcision. Okay, what's going on here? Why does Paul have to reprove Peter for this? This goes back to Acts chapter 10. You know, Peter has the vision with the animals, you know, the unclean animals. Peter gives you the meaning of that in this verse here. He's speaking to the Roman centurion here, saying, you know that a Yehudi, a Jew, is not allowed to associate with or to go to one of another race. Please find me where it says that in the Torah. You won't. This was a Jewish Pharisaic tradition that the Jews could not eat with those of the nations. But Elohim has shown me that I should not call any man common or unclean. So the vision of the unclean animals was nothing to do with food. It was to do, essentially Elohim was dealing with Peter's leaven. His Jewish leaven that a Jew cannot eat with one from the nations. And what's happening here is that Peter's slipping back into his old ways because he's afraid of those of the circumcision. And this is why Paul is having to reprove him. It's not that Paul is reproving Peter for keeping the Torah. He's reproving him for going back to his Talmudic tradition, the things that he'd been liberated from, right? This will make sense as to what he goes on to say. And the rest of the Yehudim joined him in hypocrisy, so that even Barnabas was led away by their hypocrisy. Again, a little leaven leavens the whole lump, right? This is what Paul was doing. Reprove your neighbor. Leviticus 19, verses 17 and 18. Do not hate your neighbor in your heart. Reprove your neighbor for certain and bear no sin because of him. And then it says, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Paul's actually keeping Torah here by reproving Peter. He's saying, whoa, Peter. And not only that, you're leading other people astray now. No. This stops right here. He was literally putting a spear through it. But when I saw that they were not walking straight according to the truth of the good news. Again, what's the good news? The faith of the first century had a Torah principle at the core of it. He said to Kepha before them all, if you, being a Jew, live as the nations and not as the Yehudim. Remember what what was the vision to Peter? Peter was told that he should not call any man unclean, which means he was interacting with the nations, right? This is what Paul is talking about, that you live as the nations and not as a Jew, i.e. you're interacting with them, because the Jews, they don't. Why then do you compel the nations to live as Jews? He's saying, why, you've not been walking in these Jewish traditions now for quite some time. You're now slipping back into them, and now you're expecting the nations to walk in your Jewish tradition. This is what Paul's saying. And this word here, compel, anagkadzo, is the same word that Titus was not compelled to be circumcised. So either by force or by other means, right? And here we see that, you'd have seen almost this, Peter almost shaming the nations into, anyway, I don't want to get into that. But this is what Paul is referring to, the tradition of Jews not eating with nations, not that Peter was keeping the law. Okay, to live as a Jew does not mean to walk in Torah. To live as a Jew here was to walk in the traditions of the elders. I hope this is making sense. We, Yehudim, Jews by nature, so physically in the flesh, and not of the nations, sinners. Paul is clearly saying that we as Jews are sinners too. Okay? So this means that the Jews of the day were in the same pickle as the nations of the day because they all sinned. Do you see the point? Knowing that a man is not declared by works of Torah, but through belief in Yeshua Messiah, even we have believed in Messiah Yeshua in order to be declared right by belief in Messiah, and not by works of Torah, because by works of Torah no flesh shall be declared right. Now, so look, again, we have all broken the law, the Torah. Therefore, the penalty of sin is above us, which means that we will die. Our flesh will die. Now, and this is all Paul is saying. Now, I believe Paul is also alluding to something else. There's a document in the Dead Sea Scrolls called MMT in the scholarly circles. It stands for Miksat Ma'aseh HaTorah. It literally means pertinent works or acts of the law. And this was a document, and this pertinent works of the law is the same Greek here. When you translate it from Hebrew to Greek, it's the same Greek that Paul is using here, works of Torah, works of the law, okay? Now, what's really interesting about this document, it was by the Qumran community, and they're going through certain Torah commands, and then they interpret them, and they add their little things, their little rabbinical traditions to them, okay? So, and this document was clearly kind of going around, okay? So when Paul is saying the works of the law, the works of Torah, I also believe he's hinting at this document that was going around. And again, what was the document? The rabbinical interpretations of how to walk out the commands. You read some of these things, like especially the ones to do with ritual purity. Some of the conclusions and commands they're coming to are nowhere in Torah. So it's man's interpretation of how to, again, the traditions. So not only will you not be saved by your obedience to Torah, because we all fall short, but you're definitely not going to be saved by man's interpretation of it. So I believe there's a dual thing going on here. And I believe this is why Paul says in Romans, for not the hearers of the Torah are righteous in the sight of Elohim, but the doers of the Torah shall be declared right. Right? Because look, Galatians 2:16, knowing that a man is not declared right by works of Torah, by works of the law. But in Romans 2:13, he's saying the doers of the law shall be declared right. Do you see? This is why people are like, Paul, speak straight, okay? This is why I believe he's hinting at this Talmudic interpretation of Torah, if that makes sense. So, and again, Romans 2:13, this word here, declared right, this is the same word used for justified in the Greek, as in eternal life, the doers of the Torah. And if, while seeking to be declared right by Messiah, we ourselves are also found sinners, is Messiah then a servant of sin? Let it not be. For if I rebuild what I once overthrew, I establish myself a transgressor. And Christianity will say, see, Paul used to keep the Torah. And it's like, remember what he said early on in Galatians 1, that he was zealous for the traditions of his fathers. And again, Mark chapter 7, they were putting aside the command of Elohim for the traditions. This is what Paul is talking about. For if I rebuild what I once overthrew, I establish myself a transgressor, a sinner, okay? And again, remember, what was Paul's mentality before he came to Messiah? Unless you are circumcised, according to the practice of Moshe, you are unable to be saved. Paul's mentality was that his salvation was from his works, from his obedience to Torah and to his traditions, okay? Now, all have fallen short. If you're not going to believe in Messiah for salvation, you're a sinner. Do you see the point he's trying to make? Again, Galatians 1:14, I progressed in Judaism beyond many of my age and my race, being more exceedingly ardent for the traditions of my fathers. Which means that, look, the blood of Messiah cleanses us from our transgression, right? He took the sin upon us. He paid the penalty. If you throw Messiah out, you're back to being a sinner. And this is all Paul is saying. If I rebuild what I once overthrew, what? His traditions, his mentality in salvation through works, he's back to the point of being a sinner. Because everyone has fallen short. Without Messiah, one is dead in their trespasses, as all have transgressed and fallen short of the glory of Elohim. This is why Paul's saying, if I go back to what I was, I'm a transgressor. I don't want to go back to that. We are all transgressors. Philippians 3. If anyone else thinks to trust, this is what Paul used to be like. If anyone else thinks to trust in the flesh, I more. Circumcised on the 8th day, of the race of Yisrael, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, according to Torah, a Pharisee, according to zeal or ardor, persecuting the assembly, according to righteousness that is in the law, having become blameless. And Paul's not being, arrogant here. But what might have been a gain to me, I have counted as loss because of Messiah. And again, Christianity says, see, it was all pointless. It was all pointless. This is not what Paul is saying. He's talking of which one brings salvation. What is more? Because again, look, if anyone else thinks to trust in the flesh, and we're going to see this play out over Galatians, flesh or spirit, faith in your own works or faith in Messiah. And he's saying, don't put your faith in your flesh. Your flesh is corrupt. Not the Torah, your flesh. What is more, I even count it all to be lost because of the excellence of the knowledge of Messiah Yeshua, my master, for whom I have suffered the loss of all, and count them as refuse in order to gain Messiah, i.e. the traditions. He counts it all as, the word there for refuse is what was thrown to the dogs and the pigs, right? Rubbish. He's saying all this tradition, putting the faith in my flesh, gone, because Messiah is my hope. And to be found in him, not having my own righteousness, which is of the law, but that which is through belief in Messiah, the righteousness which is from Elohim on the basis of faith, of belief. Now notice here, he's saying the law has a certain amount of righteousness. Not having my own righteousness, which is of the law. Remember that it is right. Deuteronomy says it is righteousness when we walk in these commands. But here's the big problem. None of us have ever walked perfectly in that law. Thus, we need Messiah's righteousness. But that doesn't undo the righteousness of the Torah. Isaiah 64:6, all of us has become as one unclean, and all our righteousnesses are as soiled rags. Used menstrual cloth is the Hebrew there. And all of us fade like a leaf, and our crookednesses, like the wind, have taken us away. This is a people that had the Torah, by the way. Again, we fall short so much. And this is all Paul was saying. He wasn't doing away with it. He's just saying that our keeping of the Torah is not enough. And this is what Paul is referencing to. If I rebuild what I once overthrew, it's essentially to say no to Messiah and to now put faith in his own obedience. For through Torah, I died to Torah in order to live to Elohim. See, you're dead to the law. You don't need to keep the law. You're dead to it. We're going to cover this more when we get to Romans, okay? Because in Romans chapter 7, there's a really interesting thing. But again, you've got to remember, why does Torah kill us? Is it because Torah is evil? No, it's because we are evil. Our hearts are sinful. Our hearts are deceitfully wicked. We broke it. Therefore, it's our own actions that are evil. Right? This is why Paul says, the law that was meant to bring life ended up bringing death. Why? Because we broke it. Remember, it's the Torah of freedom. We're the ones in bondage. And again, remember that the penalty of, all men will die. This is how through Torah I died in order to live to Elohim. But we'll dive more into this when we do Romans. For I have been impaled or crucified with Messiah, and I no longer live, but Messiah lives in me. Now, how did Messiah live? Perfect, spotless, sinless lamb, right? No lawlessness. And that which I now live in the flesh, I live by faith or in belief in the Son of Elohim, who loved me and gave himself for me. So Paul is saying that now that I have the blood of Messiah covering my missing the mark, my breaking of the law, it is no longer I who live. Why? Because through the law, I died because he'd fallen short of it. And now he's saying, but now it's Messiah who lives in me. I do not set aside the favor of Elohim. What is the favor of Elohim? Messiah, the good news that freely you don't have to pay for to accept Messiah. For if righteousness is through Torah, then Messiah died for naught. Look, he's not speaking ill of the Torah here. Again, this is in the context of all have fallen short. Okay? No one shall be declared right by works because we are sinners. So we need the favor of Elohim. That's all Paul is saying. Because if we didn't sin, Messiah wouldn't have needed to come. That's all Paul is saying. So how did Messiah live? Again, first of all, he was the perfect sinless lamb, right? He kept the Torah perfectly. That's what it means to be sinless. Romans 12, I call upon you, therefore, brothers, through the compassion of Elohim, to present your bodies a living offering, a living sacrifice, set apart, well-pleasing to Elohim, your reasonable worship. What does it mean to be set apart? Because if you've done away with the law, you just get to make up what being set apart means. It feels right in my spirit. Romans 7:12, so that the Torah, the law, truly is set apart, and the command set apart, and righteous and good. Paul is clearly saying, look, the Torah is set apart, and he's saying that we need to present our bodies as a living offering set apart. What do you think he's meaning here? He hasn't left us without knowing what he means. And we'll really break this down when we do Romans 6, 7, and 8. But he clearly says the Torah is set apart. We know elsewhere that Yeshua says in John 6:63 that the words he speaks are spirit, right? And we're told to walk in the spirit. It's not this airy-fairy. Anyway, we'll tackle that with Romans. Deuteronomy 6:25, it is righteousness for us when we guard to do all this command before Yah our Elohim as he has commanded us. We're being told that we need to live in a set-apart manner, in a righteous manner. And look, any Christian will tell you, yes, we need to be holy and righteous. But what does that look like? If you've done away with the very standard that teaches you what is set apart and righteous. Now you make it up. Or you cherry pick the bits of the Torah that you like. So, man, I hope that's been a blessing. I hope that it's clarified at least the first 2 chapters of Galatians. Like, as we move forward, we're going to have to literally do 1 chapter per teaching because there's a lot to break down. But I hope people can really see so far that Paul was not speaking ill of Torah. Again, what were the warnings that we were given? Peter was saying, look, guys, Paul is hard to understand. He's operating at a level that is even maybe a bit beyond us, right? But do not twist his words to the delusion of lawlessness. And now you can maybe understand, why there were other, especially from the Jewish background, that maybe accused Paul of being lawless. They were pulling him out of context. They weren't listening to what he was actually saying. And these people had not gotten rid of the Talmudic leaven out of them. So let's take a break here. I hope that's been a blessing. And yeah, amen.